Everybody, welcome to our August 2021 edition of Learn Lightroom Live. Man, we've been doing this a while, and this month is starting to feel exactly like August of 2020. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I just had to send in my vaccination information for a corporate client so I can go shoot, which feels, I guess, better than a year ago. But yeah, hey, we're here. We're doing things. We're doing the things. Hey, Patty. Hey, Dragon, Steven, all of y'all out there. I know this isn't going to be the most exciting one, but I think this actually is something that I think if you can do interior, if you have any desire to do interior photography or exterior, I think it can actually be something lucrative. So although it may not be as exciting as some of the other forms of photography that I practice. Oh, hey, I found the key card I was looking for. It can absolutely be one that pays the bills. So if you like making money with your, am I in a box? Yes, I'm always in a box. This is the same room. I just didn't feel like putting a graphic up behind me this week. I don't know, just didn't. And yes, Dragon, we will be getting into therapy. Actually, I think, during editing, when I'm editing, I definitely get into a flow state. And I think I process out a lot of my emotions as I sit in my desk and stare at Lightroom and listen to like true crime documentaries. I just watched Cocaine Cowboys. Yeah, that was a fun one on Netflix. And then last session during editing, I started watching Heist. So I've definitely been watching some, like, I don't know. I'm getting out my guilty pleasures of, watching out, figuring out how to like stage a drug heist while I'm editing commercial interiors. Yeah. No, it is exciting. This is good info. So what we're going to do, I'm going to start from the raw file, and we're going to work through it. As always, if you have questions, please type them in the chat. I will answer them as best I can. I can see them. And then, make sure that I have the right photo up. Cool. So let's go ahead and go into split mode. We can see that. There we go. All right. So this is our original file here. This is the raw file. Kind of dull, very unassuming, underexposed. Not really pretty yet. I would not deliver this to a client. This is not our standard. So this is a combined file. So a lot of times when I'm out in the field, I go ahead. My goal in the field, let's talk about that, right? In the field, what should you be doing? Okay. The goal when we're out shooting is to bring home good data. Okay. That's our goal. Bring home good data. Because we know we're going to process it, right? We know we're going to edit it. That's where the magic happens, right? We know we're going to do something to it. So the goal is to get good data. Okay, so for me, even if I don't use all three of the bracketed shots, I might just use one exposure, but at least I know for whatever reason that I have it. Memory cards are cheap, hard drives are cheap, bandwidth is fast. While you're there, get everything you need to get. I'm not saying overshoot everything, but once you commit to your shot, get some brackets in there, right? Get some high brackets, get some low, get some right in the middle. And then this is a Merge Hdr in Lightroom. So let me show you how to do that real quick. It's really simple. Here are let's bring that up. Here are the three original files, okay? So that's the overexposed. And I don't know if you can see my settings, but I'm at ISO 200, f22, sorry, not f22, 22 millimeters, f11. And this is the 1 second exposure. This is a 1/8 exposure. That's our 0. And then this is our underexposed, right? So that's 1/60 of a second. So I'm shooting on a tripod. I am in I achieved focus and I probably switched it off into manual focus so that there wasn't any bumping or an attempt to refocus during bracketing. So the other thing, this happened at our Milky Way class. Somebody was shooting with a lens that had image stabilization on the lens, and they were shooting on a tripod, and we forgot to turn it off. And we were getting some very interesting results. You could see what the vibration reduction was doing in the lens, and it was like, but you could see it play out in the stars. So that was kind of neat. It looked very jittery. We kept thinking that something was, we couldn't figure out what was wrong, and we were going down the list of checks and image stabilization. So when you're shooting on a tripod, you don't need image stabilization. So turn that off, because sometimes it'll shift in between shots, and then your merges don't line up, and that's really annoying. So again, how do we do this? We just select those 3 files, right? 9, 10, 11. I just hit shift click, right? So I selected 9, shift click to 11. I'm going to right click on any of them. We're going to go photo merge HDR. And that's going to allow you to blend those 3 files into a new raw file. Okay. So what that comes out with is going to be looking like this. And you'll notice it says hdr.dng. So that's our new raw file that has all the data of those 3 original files. Yeah. Okay, so that's what we're working with. It's a merge file, okay? And if you notice, look at our histogram, right? That one's all the way to the right. This one's mostly there, but see how it's pegged a little bit up on the right? It's got a little peg to it. And then our underexposed all the way on the left. So then when we look at our merge file, right, it's kind of right there in the center, and it's got all that good data, and that way we know we're not blowing highlights or anything like that. So, order of operations, right? Oh, let's see if I can see. Not focus. Oh, hey, Chelsea, what's up? We have Patty and Chelsea Robertson. I don't think they're related, but hey. You know, Patty, I'm not focus bracketing. I'm at f11 at 22 mil, so everything past like 4 feet will be in focus pretty much, or enough that it doesn't matter. These photos are going onto our clients' websites, so they're probably using them pretty low res would be my guess. So no, I don't focus bracket. That's why I would be at like f11, or, you know, I don't really go down to f16. I start getting diffraction there. So f8, f11, those are probably my 2 used apertures, but at such a wide angle, really anything past 3 or 4 feet, and everything's going to be pretty sharp. You know, we can punch in and look, but I mean, it's, you know, everything's pretty well in focus there as we zoom around. I mean, this chair's, you know, close, it's sharp. That wall all the way back there is sharp, so we're pretty good. The lens I use, I shoot Canon. This is the EF 16-35 f4. And one of the reasons I love that lens, I'm usually shooting at f8 or f11. So the f4 version is half the weight, half the cost, and I think is a higher resolution lens than the 2.8 EF. So this is my go-to. I have other ultra wides, but this is kind of my go-to EF. And this is shot on an R6. I do have a circular polarizer on my lens here as well, and so that is doing some work, especially in this reflective area back by these doors, kind of way back in the corner. Okay, yeah, it's a great lens. The 16-35 f4 is a steal. It's under 1,000, and it's super sharp, super resolution, and I really like the way it's sunburst. Okay, so first thing, if you know me, the first thing I'm going to tell you to do, it's always this profile, right? Always profile. So I've created a profile based on our X-Rite Color Checker Passport from X-Rite, although I think they just changed their name to Calibrate. I'm not sure. Anyway, this is, watch the blues, right? I'll do this again. Watch how the blues go from kind of dull and just going to R6 Daylight, which is our calibrated. Man, those blues really come out a little bit more. Yeah. So I highly recommend that you are using a calibrated lens, calibrated camera body, and that you build those profiles inside Lightroom with the X-Rite software. It's really going to make your editing start at a much easier place. Your colors are already popping more. You're already getting more dynamic range, which is something we're going to be working to bring out. So first step, always camera profile. Second step, lens geometry. So we're going to scroll all the way down to where it says lens corrections. We want to enable profile corrections. We want to enable chromatic aberrations, right? We don't want that purple fringing, that green fringing, and that's what the chromatic aberration is trying to get rid of. So we definitely want some of those. You would notice that. Let's see if we turn it off. I wonder if there is some. There probably isn't at f11, but you would notice it like on like high contrast areas, especially in the corner. I don't think this lens is going to generate any of that. So, but just as a habit, I start there. Vignetting, I like some vignetting, so we'll just take that to 50. I don't want the software to have to brighten up the corners. At f11, there really isn't a lot of darkness in the corners, so I don't want it to do a lot of work. If I want that effect, I will do it myself. Okay. Now, here's the other big part of this, okay? We've done the lens correction, so we've enabled the profile for that lens. The second is we need to make sure our lines are vertical, okay? See how this line here is pinching in? Or we can see that pinch in. And then that door, man, that looks like a door to Narnia or something on my left-hand side. And it's very left, right? So my angles are pinching in due to, I don't know, I guess I was not quite level with my camera. But that's what's causing it. So we can try auto. Let's see what that does. That's okay. A lot of times I use my crop overlay with this grid to kind of check my verticals. And then I look at the lines there and it feels close, but that line right there is still pretty wonky. And I feel like this door is still pretty wonky. So for me, that's not quite good enough. So I'm going to come back down to transform and I'm going to go to guided. Okay. So guided is a tool that came in, I don't know, maybe Lightroom 7 maybe, but it really changed, the ability to do all of your work inside Lightroom. Because before, to get the guided tool, you had to go into Photoshop to use the lens correction tool. And nobody wants to do that. So we have a pure Lightroom workflow now, but allowing that guided workflow to be there is one of the reasons that we can do it. So what this does, it allows us to draw our outer lines that are the most, right, start from the out and work our way in. And so I'm just going to trace this nice vertical here. Okay, so that's my right edge. And then on the left edge, I'm going to do the same. And I'm actually going to pick not the doorway. I'm going to pick this vertical here because that one's actually a little bit more important to me. And so it gives you a nice zoomed in view. And pull that down. Yeah, like right there. And then that should give me a tighter vertical. You can also like delete that one. We could go to an even more outer edge here. We'll go to this doorway. Yeah, there we go. And that's going to give us a much straighter view. Okay, so that's kind of a big part. I want to get my geometry right first because everything else is kind of based on that. Okay, yeah, that looks a lot better. Now, if it's still not right, you can go into the manual transform and we could shift up or shift down. Okay. So if it's still not quite giving you what you want, you can go into the manual controls. I use the vertical and horizontal. You can change kind of the plane of the image, left and right, and up and down. And that's what that horizontal and vertical are doing. Okay. You know, and these are tools that, you know, they're made for interiors. But you could absolutely use some of these same tools on landscapes. Okay. Absolutely. You could use this on landscapes, any other type of photo you want to transform, make it look a little different. They're certainly there. They work for every photo. So, okay. So next order, right? So I would say either exposure or white balance are going to be the next thing. And I'll show you a good trick with white balance. And one of the reasons I picked this photo is because it's actually a blend of daylight and this kind of like LED light above. So with LEDs, we have a little bit of tungsten in the back, and then we have daylight coming through a big window. Okay, so I would say either or, right? Either do white balance or exposure. In this case, I'm going to do exposure just so I can see what I'm working with. So I'm going to bring my exposure up. See that histogram up here in the center? Let's bring that up to where all that data is more in the center. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Maybe like 1.3. Now we're starting to see things. And I'll give you a cool little trick, right? When we're editing white balance, see this socket right there? That's a white socket. So we can use our eyedropper, click on the white, a little red. But like any light switches, if you're doing corporate events and they're wearing name tags, they're usually white, so you can punch in on those and get a white balance based on the name tags as well. Yeah, this is a little red to me, so it's a starting spot. Yeah, something like that. That's a little closer. Looks pretty good. Starting spot. Okay. We have a good exposure now. We have a pretty good white balance. So the big part from here is going to be a lot like the old film days where you're dodging and burning. In the final version of this file that I did for the client, I had something like 5 gradient tools and like 18 radial brushes. Okay. And the reason I had so many radials is because that's how I dodge and burn. Okay. So a lot of times when I'm starting looking at a photo, I want to say out loud the things that I don't like. So in this case, I don't like how much brighter this area is. See this kind of hot spot coming in? This area right here is brighter, and this area is really dark. This looks very dead back here. And I don't want it to be dead. I want it to feel more balanced. So this area in particular is going to be a very big area of concern for me. The other area, this doorway here, is much darker than the doorway next to it. So I want to even those out a little bit. And I feel like this is a little bit too red. So we may add a little color difference. The ceiling tiles, right, they're supposed to be white. They're very dull gray. These skylights here, if I look, they're actually blown out, right? So if you go up to the histogram, you can see your shadow and highlight clipping, and those are clipped. So I want to put a radial on each of those so that we can bring down the white so that there's actually data and they're not overexposed, especially if this goes to print or if it goes into a brochure. I don't want those bright overexposures to end up being something where the printer wouldn't lay down ink where those where the highlights are clipped. Okay. All right. The other thing, I don't like how the bottom of this floor here is bright relative to the center area. So I'm going to bring in a gradient and bring it up from the bottom and darken that. I'm going to brighten my roof a little bit because it's a little dull. And we'll start there with gradient tools, and then we're going to fine tune with radial. So I think the big thing to think about is kind of start with your outer images, geometry. Let's get the color right. Let's get the exposure right. And then from there, it's so much about, really it's dodging and burning, but on in a Lightroom scale, right? So let's get started. So I'm going to do a gradient tool. And I just want to darken this kind of foreground a little bit because I don't want your eyes leaving the frame at the bottom. So I can use a little bit of darken shadow, a little bit of darken highlights. And let's just kind of darken that up a little bit. Yeah. Like it. Okay. Now, up here in the ceiling, we're going to go opposite. I want more light coming from the top. So just a simple plus exposure, maybe +5 from the top. Let's bring that down. Okay. I'm not too worried about these yet. We'll come back to them. I'm going to boost the shadows a little bit too. Let's boost that exposure a little bit more. Right? Great thing about our gradient tools is they're editable, right? I can always come back and adjust them later. But for now, I'm digging that so far. So those are kind of my big blocky movements. Okay, so we started big global adjustments, and now we're going to, and we did gradient, which is kind of our medium zone, and now we're going to start getting out the radial tool and just go to town on this. First thing, when I did my gradient, now I have a hot spot there, so I'm going to bring down highlights. That bothers me. Okay, invert, and then we can kind of bring down just that little hot area. Even that out exposure. Good. Let's go ahead and take care of these windows. All I really need to do for the windows is do maybe like a -20 white. And we'll turn on our blink protection there. And then I'm just going to draw, invert those. And it's just going to be like Bob Ross, right? Just happy little ovals. We're just going to draw some happy little ovals. Just enough to knock down those highlights where they're not overexposed. Okay. We want to use invert. We want to use the data inside the circle. Okay. You can also right click on one and hit duplicate and then just drag it down. Okay. So now we don't have anything overexposed. Ooh, just a little bit. Yes, we do. Cool. Takes care of those. So that allows me some protection. If I wanted to brighten up this area here, right, with a radial tool, it'll protect these a little bit more, right? So let's do that. So if I want to add a little bit more exposure there to the center, Okay. You see we're still not blinking out by what we've done there to protect those skylights. Right? And we're just going to keep adding a bunch of little zones of pockets of light. That wall there, I want to bring that up. Let's bring up the shadows there. Okay. And then oppositely, no, that's not a word. Opposite. Right, we're going to bring down our highlights kind of on this wall. Okay. Not so much to where they're dark, but I just want to balance all that out. Okay. And I'm going to go even smaller. That door, though, I'm going to add a little bit more. Ooh, we're just going to be stacking stuff. There we go. So just a little +5, +1. All that good stuff. So let's just do a quick sanity check. Okay? If we hit the letter Y, we'll get a before and after. Oop, that showed me my before. Let's go to the finish file. And let's look at the before, just to kind of see where we are. Okay? This is the finished one that I delivered, but look at where we started, look at where we are, already. Okay? So, pretty good. We're kind of there. Still a little dark, but we'll get there. Maybe a little more exposure. Yeah, now we're starting to get there. This row of chairs, this whole left side's a little dark to me. So we're going to add another little pocket of light there. There we go. Starting to get there. This chair, just little happy little zones of light. Okay. So I think you kind of get the idea there. Let's talk about what these presence tools do. Texture adds texture. I don't like adding texture so much globally. I think texture is maybe better as like a brush. So an example of where I would use that. Let's say I wanted to make the floor look like it had more texture in it. This is a great tip for landscape photographers, right? You don't need the sky to have texture, but sometimes you want rocks or something else to have it. So let's add a little texture, a little clarity. And then I'm going to have a flow of like 60. Imagine if you had like an air sprayer gun or like a paint sprayer. Flow is like how much paint you allow to go through, right? So not 100%. And I'm just going to kind of drag over those areas that I want to have a little bit more texture, a little more clarity. Okay. I don't need the ceiling to be more texture, but maybe the floor, right? Okay. And I can always adjust. There we go. Just make the floor pop a little bit more. Okay. Yeah. And that way, at 60, it allows me to blend in a little bit where it doesn't just 100% paint it everywhere. It gives me a little bit more zone of control. I like zone. So I don't necessarily use presence as a global control. I use a lot of the presence tools as more of a localized control. Dehaze is great, just a little bit, maybe 5. Just a little bit, right? That plays with our localized contrast. That's all we really need. Vibrance, I like Vibrance. I noticed that my R6 responds. It needs a little more help in Vibrance for whatever reason. Generally with my 5D Mark IV, I'm typically like +15, +20 Vibrance. I noticed with my R6 that it starts looking right between like 20 and 30 Vibrance. I'm not really sure why that is. Just different sensors, I guess. All right, so now take a step back. Let's still look at what's wrong. I still notice there's too much red over here versus kind of more of the neutral tones to this wall over there. So let's do another radial tool, but this time it's going to be a temperature, right? And so we're going to tint, and we're going to get rid of some of that red. So we're going to add green to get rid of red, and I'm just going to draw that kind of over here. Okay, this whole area, I'm going to make a really big gradient. I just don't like how much red's over there. And I'm going to cool it down a little bit too. Maybe like -10, -10. There we go. And that just kind of neutralizes some of the red tones that were really getting a little in force over there. Yeah. What do y'all think so far? I'm using all my CPU process. What do we think? We liking this? All right. So something else that we can do at this point, I love playing with my HSL panels. Okay, hue, saturation, luminance. Okay, so these blues, I want them a little bit darker. So I can just drag my dropper tool from my luminance panel, click in a zone, and drag down. So that's going to darken my blues just a little. Okay, I could also go to saturation, same area, and I could saturate my blues a little bit more. So I can do this on individual color channels instead of doing global adjustments for saturation or luminance. Okay. My reds, I would probably want to desaturate this color of that orange door a little bit. So I want to pull down the saturation values for the oranges and yellows. Otherwise, they just get too overpowering. Your eye goes to them. I don't want that. Okay. So really learn to love this HSL panel, especially for commercial interiors, because like this wall, right, if we wanted to, we can make this wall very bright, right, or very dark, right? We could take our blues up or down depending on what we liked, right? Same with the reds, right? We can make them dark, we can make them bright. Okay. I probably use the HSL panel on like 99% of my photos. It's one of the first things I do, especially with like skin tone, anything that has like a set color. It's really a big deal. Yeah, really a big deal. Oh, one thing else to change in Lightroom, I should have said noise reduction. I just have it set to standard to be 10, 50, 50, 10, 50, 50. For whatever reason, Lightroom defaults to 0 in luminance and 25 in color. And I find that wrong. Like that's 25 is a lot. Oh, am I getting spacey over here? Ooh. Good times. All right, we're getting some buffering going on because I was using all those radials. One of the downsides of trying to stream on the same computer using Lightroom, all of those radial tools use the graphic processor, which is also what's used to put out the streaming. So sometimes it gets a little overwhelmed. All right. Let's take another look for another photo from the same session. This is, again, an HDR, okay? And I think this is a big issue, right? We have giant windows. We have data outside, and the data inside is very dark relative to the brightness outside. Now, there are absolutely ways to do this in Photoshop. Okay, there's absolutely ways to do this in Photoshop. Right, you could do layer masking. You could do a pen tool to generate a new layer mask. But I want to show you a way that I did this completely in Lightroom. Okay, right, we're going to enable profile corrections. Right, auto should work just fine for these instructions there. Close enough for what I want to show you. Okay, so here's the problem. Let's take a look at it. Here's the problem. I want to make the inside much brighter. Okay, I want to make the inside much brighter. So let's do that, right? We take that exposure and we make the inside much brighter. Great. The problem is now our window is overexposed. So this is one of the only times I would actually use the brush tool. And I use the brush tool in congruence with the luminance masking and color masking. So in this case, ooh, it's not liking me today. So in this case, I can brush out the highlights in a very specific area. Okay, so it at least gets rid of my blinkies, but it still doesn't get me all the way of what I want. I really want that nice, pretty view to come back in. All right, so I'm gonna go really dark. All right, so now we're going to get all the way back using the brush tool. Okay, I want to get that view all the way back. I don't know that this is the best way to do it, but I want to show you a way in Lightroom to do it. Okay, so we're getting all that sky back in. We're getting all that data back in. It's looking good, right? Looking better, but it's very messy. Okay, so there's a couple things we can do, right? We can just go back and paint in smaller and smaller circles until we get what we want. If you hit the Alt key, you can go back and erase what you painted. Okay, go back and erase it. We can also use our range mask. And range mask is a huge benefit. This is in the last 2 years that they've had that. So we can say, hey, only apply it to like the top 2/3 of the photo, right? So we can set the range. Hey, only apply these instructions in this range. Okay. Right. So that certainly helps smooth everything out. It's not perfect, but it certainly helps smooth. I think this is another benefit that no matter what type of photography you do, learning how to use the luminance mask in Lightroom is a big help. It's very fast. It's very easy. And it's really changed how I process photos and how much work I can do in Lightroom relative to having to bring it into Photoshop. Okay. The other thing you could do, you could also say, instead of luminous mask, we could say color mask. Maybe we're trying to get just the sky, right? I want just the sky data. So I could say, hey, color, I want, just these colors to get those instructions. Okay. So if the color is in this area that I just kind of drew a square around, if the color's in that range, then darken it, otherwise leave it alone. Right, and so we can play with those ranges. But color masking is another big way to get your selections done very quickly in Lightroom without having to take it into Photoshop, right? And not that I'm not saying don't ever take your photos into Photoshop. Please don't take it to mean that. What I'm just saying is I think there are well-known ways to do it in Photoshop, and I don't think they're as well-known on how to do it if you only want to use Lightroom. Okay, but luminance masking and color masking for all types of photography, I think, are super beneficial. Does that make sense? Are we doing okay? Can y'all still see me? Now, let me show you what this photo ended up looking like when I was done. There we go. And this was all done in Lightroom. And here's my mask that I spent like hours painting. Not hours, but I did spend quite a while painting this mask. And just going very fine tooth and just painting exactly what I wanted to paint. Just showing you that it could be done in Lightroom if you wanted. So how could you use this for your work, right? Your landscape, right? You want to just make the sky darker, but nothing else. I would use luminance masking, right? Even portraits, right? Skin tones are red and orange, so we can color mask the red and orange and apply effects that way where it won't touch the eyes, it won't touch the hair, only skin. So there's some really cool ways you can use this. But I thought this was a neat example of how we might use this just in Lightroom without having to do like very fine tooth layer masks in Photoshop. Right. That makes sense. Are we making sense yet? I know that's a lot to take in and you're looking at it online. So, hey y'all. Hey everybody. I think part of this comes down to like having your own style as well, about like how far you take those windows down, how far you take the ambient down, how much you bring up inside. The easier way to do this would probably be to create a layer mask inside of Photoshop. The problem that Lightroom has is the brush tool is a circle. And so if you have square windows, it can be very hard to draw a square. So take a circular, right, marker and try to draw a square with it, right? You can't ever quite get the edges just right. So if we were in Photoshop, the way to do that, you can use the pen tool and you can trace exactly those, build a layer mask, and you can bring in exposures. Right. The other way to have done this, we could have exposed for the windows. We could have exposed for the windows and then brought in lighting and then lit the room. Now, here's why I didn't do that. These buildings, the people that we shoot for are the general contractors. And so this isn't about enhancing what's there. It's about doing our best to faithfully recreate and to capture the lighting that's there, because some of their subcontractors are the people that installed the lights. So it would look weird if we were using, off-camera lights to change the direction and the color of the light too much in a way that was no longer representative of the work that was done. Okay, so that's just kind of a thing to consider. If we were there and it was more, and we were shooting like just for the architect, we might be using off-camera lighting to really enhance or to bring out certain features that the architect might want us to talk about or to show about. But in this case, it was really about, showing all the work that went into this building. And by bringing off-camera lighting, yes, we could get those windows exposure much easier, but we would definitely be changing the shape and quality of the light that was in this room. And so that's kind of a balancing act that we have to deal with. So this is where we would bracket so that we get that whole range of exposure. And then, just manipulating that new raw file inside Lightroom. Yeah, so this one that we're working on, Patty, this one is a bracketed shot as well. Yes, I can show you the 3 files. So if we hit G, it goes into library. This is shot on 7.9. So I'll show you what they look like. So this is the overexposed file. This is the underexposed file. And that's the zeroed out file. Again, I was at, I don't know, like 35 millimeters f11. Right, so everything's fairly in focus, right? Everything's fairly in focus. And then our raw, right? So that's what the finished file looks like. But the raw combined photo, our starting point, was that kind of underexposed. D gets back to develop. Yeah. So that's the left is where we started, and this is where we ended up. Okay. You can see I used 4 more radial brushes, and I used, no gradients. Wow, that's surprising. I think I was so concerned with getting the windows right that I should have darkened the floor a little bit more. The floor is bothering me right here. I should have done like a little minus highlights and then added some dehaze there. Well, we could have darkened that floor a little bit more, brought in a little more contrast there. And I did have a polarizer on. Now, something else I could have done, and I certainly do that with cars a lot, is I will do not an exposure bracketing, but a rotation of my polarizer bracketing. With a, if you have multiple planes of reflection you need to control, you would need to rotate your polarizer to combat each of those planes of reflections that you want to control. And then that would have to go into Photoshop so that you could layer mask the good parts of each photo with the good reflections in. It's something we do with cars, but for buildings, I never really thought to do it until just now. So I'm gonna have to try that sometime. But that's taking a lot more data, which fine. Generally, we don't have that many planes of reflection. Usually it's either windows or the floor. It's rarely both, but you could certainly use your circular polarizer for multiple exposures to correct for multiple reflections in a room. Yeah. Yeah, this is a fun little project. You know, if you notice, a lot of times I'm just shooting brackets, but I don't always use all the brackets. I don't make everything go into an HDR. Like this photo, honestly, if you look at the histogram, it's got enough data there. I did happen to use it in that sense, but I probably didn't need to. I probably could have saved myself of not having to bring it into a bracket. A lot of times if you're interior only with no like exterior windows, you're probably in a safe enough zone where, you know, your camera's dynamic range should be able to handle that generally. Unless you just have very deep pockets of light, generally one exposure will be okay. I just don't always know which one it's going to be. So I might still do a bracket, but I might do it in a smaller range. So I might do like a -2, 0, +2, or a -1, 0, +1. I'm just trying to hit the perfect one. It's always so hard to see through your screen, through your camera. And so I'm just going to do a bracket just to pick the best exposure later. And I don't know which one it's going to be, but I'll pick one of those. Yeah. All right. Question and like, this is a great one, right? This one is just the straight raw file, right? It's just a wall, right? So I don't need that extreme dynamic range. Like even this file, even with all the contrast, even with +40 contrast, I'm still not overexposed and I'm still not underexposed, right? I have no part of data. All the data is inside this image, right? So I guess there's a little peak right there I didn't see, but you know, it's fine. That's not gonna, nobody's gonna notice that. So this is, I shot the bracket, right? There's the 0, there's the under, this is the over, but I didn't combine them because the over had plenty of data, so I didn't need it. But I shot it. But then in post, I didn't need to go to the step of combining those files. Yeah. Yep. You know, but here I did because, right, we have these windows that we had to deal with, right? And so I probably put a brush over those windows, or a radial filter to bring them down, right? So this is another example of a room where the color masking would work great because every wall is its own color, and so I can bring up or down, or I can select just on colors, right? The blue wall, right? I could go to my HSL panel and change my blue walls, which I did here. I made my blues darker and I made my greens brighter. And that allowed me to balance out those walls because I can individually adjust those color channels and the brightness of them without having to add exposure or take away exposure in a global sense. Okay. Now, Dragon, is this the point in time where we get into how we feel about this and really talk about, you know, positive headspaces? Now, this is one. Here's an example of one that I did take into Photoshop. So this is the exterior of this building. It's out in LaGrange. But if we notice this is something that Lightroom can't handle. Okay, so if we look at this dirt area here, where all the grass is, that's just not something that that Lightroom can handle. So I took it into Photoshop. I did some spot healing brush. I did some clone stamping, and I filled in the grass. Okay. Dragon and fetal. I know it's a lot of processing, but because we were able to process this, here's the original. So the day was very cloudy. And kind of raining and nasty, right? That's what the raw file looked on the left, right? Just very overcast and blue. But because we could bring this file out and really make it look like it was shot on a warm summer day, it actually saved me a trip from having to drive the 3-hour round trip back and forth to LaGrange. So being able to process can actually save yourself time without having to go and reshoot stuff. Because we could make all this happen in post, it really allowed us, it saved us like 5 hours total, because I would have had to go, set up, shoot, come back, bring in new photos. And doing it this way allowed us to really bring it out. So you can, I think I blued up the sky. I blew it up. No, there's a gradient tool there, and I subtracted warmth and added cool by shifting temperature. And then I brought down my highlights, brought down my exposure. And then I used the luminance mask so that those instructions didn't get placed onto the building, only to the things that were bright. And then I probably did the same down here where I'm just dragging that. I just want to darken up that grass where it's not so nuclear looking. Nuclear. Yeah. But then we could warm it up in post, right? So as we shot it, very blue. As it's processed, a lot warmer. Yeah. Yeah, no geometry. Yeah, no geometry. Just using that shape tool, right? And in this case, yeah, auto worked fine. I was pretty far away. I switched to, I'm at 33 millimeters. I'm pretty far away. I wonder if I still shot. Yeah, I still shot with my 16-35. My plan was to shoot this with my 70-200, but there was orange barricades that I couldn't shoot through. But I want to shoot exteriors as far away as possible as I can get, and zoom in as much. And that does a couple things. One, it helps with distortion, where I'm not getting, especially a big exterior building like this. I mean, this is like, 10,000 square foot building. So I had to back up so that if I'd shot close and wide, my angles would have been super distortion, right? They would be like crazy skewed. And so by shooting further back, the weight of the center line to the outlying lines is much more even. It's a little distortion if you look on the left, but not bad. And so I want to shoot any building that I shoot, I want to shoot it from as far away as I can and then zoom in. The other thing it does, there were some kind of nasty buildings on either side of this building. And by narrowing my angle of view, when you zoom in, that's what you're doing, right? Is narrowing your angle of view. I didn't have to worry about what those buildings look like. Okay. And so when we shoot longer, we can really narrow our focus onto just our subject and not have to worry about all the wide stuff around me. So, I'm at 33, not much distortion at 33, pretty far away. And it makes it just look like a cleaner building. Yeah. Yeah. And I tried one from the back and I didn't like it. Too many lines. Didn't work. So if you're going to be using geometry, I tried to correct my geometry, but I didn't shoot wide enough. And so then the tip got cropped. And the edge got cropped over here. And I didn't like that. So make sure if you are shooting wide, knowing that you're going to fix the geometry in post, make sure you shoot, 10 or 15% wider than you think. Because you're going to lose some pixels as those geometric distortions get fixed. I know I keep saying geometry. Everybody's having flashbacks to high school math. Sorry. I actually loved high school geometry. I think I got a 97 in it. But I'm a nerd. Yeah. What questions do y'all have? What did I show you that was like, wait, show me again? What was that? Questions? Questions on what we did today? Exposure, geometry, color profile, white balance. And then dodging and burning like crazy, right? Using a bunch of radial filters. I probably should have done more on that first file, but my computer was starting to get a little wonky because it uses the GPU and then strange things happen. But yeah, it's just the same process, right? It's just dodging and burning until things get right. What other questions? What else can I answer for y'all? Any building, any real estate? Commercial buildings, I don't know, anything. Dragon's ready to cry. He just wants to go make pretty art pictures. Nothing? Nobody's got anything else? No questions? All right, Steve. I'm glad I could get no questions from you. That's good. That's good. Yeah, these are fun. I think, some of this is just exploring. ZZ Top, haha. Yeah, he died last week, man. And I think that's just a process. If you can get good at this, You know, I think there's pretty decent money in it. It certainly helped us, especially during COVID, because there's no people in the building when we're shooting. So, you know, something that I could do during the pandemic. So, yeah. Yeah, I've talked about masking in Lightroom before, Patty. I certainly have. You know, I think especially for skies, you know, you want those skies to be bluer, right? Let's look at this photo. We'll just do it on here real quick just to kind of reiterate. Right, there's no mask on it yet. So I can bring down the color of the skies, and I could even add blue to them. Right, I can make that sky much bluer. The problem is it makes this green bluer, and it makes all that bluer. So what we can do, we can either do it with color or luminance. Let's say luminance here. And we can say, hey, don't apply it to the things that are dark. Only apply those instructions to maybe like the upper 60%. Okay. Kind of smooth that in. Okay. So we can increase the contrast of the sky there, but without increasing the contrast of the building. We could also do it with color. We could say, hey, only apply these colors. Color. I added another one. Dang it. Hold on. All right. We could say, hey, only apply it basically to the blues, right? So if I hit control, I can kind of drag an area. Quit. My keyboard is not. Oh, because I didn't hit the mouse. Okay. Right. I can say, hey, anything in this area, apply it to, don't apply it to greens, right? I could draw a bigger area. Hey, anything in there, apply it to, you know, that mask to those, but don't apply it to anything that's brown or yellow or green, right? So it's a way to get instructions applied, right? See how we can make the sky brighter or darker, right? But we don't really mess with this. It should, right? I'm at, you know, -1 stop, minus a lot of highlights, but I'm not touching the building really with those instructions. And then what I would do, I'd come back with a big gradient tool in the center and say, hey, let's add exposure there. All right, and we could say, hey, let's warm that part up, but just that part. There you go. So now we have a nice warm tones in the building and cool tones in the sky, and that gives us more contrast to work with. Ah, you can't see. Dang it. I forgot to switch. All right, well, let me start over on a new file then. What's a good one to do? Let's go back to the exterior. So this isn't a raw, this is just a raw file. Okay, so what I could do, right, I want to bring out the sky. And so what I can do here is say, you know, let's make the sky darker by a stop, and let's make the highlights down, and let's make more contrast and drama. Okay. And I can just drag from the top. Now, if I don't do any masking, it's going to apply it to the building. See how the building gets darker there? And so I can do it two ways. I can either say luminance and say only apply it to the bright things, right? And I can change the range, right? Where it only, in this case, the upper, let's say the upper half of the photo gets that exposure. Or I can say, hey, only things that are the color of the sky. So if I hit control and kind of drag, anything that's blue is going to get that, these instructions. So I could blue it up, right? Add a lot of blue to my sky there. But if you notice, my building doesn't turn blue, okay? And so then what I could do is just add a lot of vibrance, a warmth back to my whole image, add up my exposure, and then let's do a radial brush in the center. Right, just in the center, brighten that up, and then we're going to add even more warmth to the building there, just to kind of make it bring out the warmth. So now we get that nice kind of warm contrast in the building and the blue in the sky. We have independent control then on the color of the blue and the brightness of the building. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a new way of thinking about photos of like, am I changing the luminance or do I want to change the color? But yeah, that's certainly something that can be worked on, right? We could come down and play with the luminance as well, right? We could say, hey, blue in the sky, get darker, and, you know, yellow warm here, get brighter in the greens, right? We could also adjust it there, and that'll give us some room. But I like doing it a little bit with more local inside of a gradient. or inside of a radial tool. The brush, the radial, and the gradient can all use luminance, and they can all use color masking. Yeah. So it's a great way to do it. Awesome. All right. Well, guys, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. It's been a whole hour of me talking about how to edit buildings. Whee! Next month, we're going to do how to edit more like sport portraits. I've had a couple requests for kind of how to do like more of that like grungy look. And then we'll talk about how to create presets with sport portraits so that we can create some, I don't know, some more dynamic looking files, really how to like make your photos pop. So I thought sport portraits would be a way to do that. And then if you're coming out on Sunday, I'm pretty excited. We're going to be shooting fire dancers. Very excited about that. So anyway, y'all have a great rest of y'all's Tuesday, and we will talk to y'all soon.